Hello there, Fantasy Degenerates, and welcome to Week 4. We're about 25% away through the season, and you kind of have a gauge of where your team's at. But we're going to go ahead and do power rankings this week. And we're going to start with number 10, Jake Page. Now, Jake, you have a bunch of mediocre players. I know you've had some injury trouble with Arian Foster, but last week I tried to make a trade with you, and I think you're cashed out of fantasy because I don't even think you looked at it. And you have a player in this week who's currently on bye. So Jake, set your lineup. I know you're better than last place in this league. Alright, so that's Jake. Let's move on to number 9. Mr. Commissioner, the fantasy guru, he calls himself. On paper, you have a good team, but fantasy is not played on paper, son. You're 0-3. And don't abuse your commissioner powers. This week we made a trade that was supposed to go through on Monday, and you went ahead and pushed it through tonight. I think you were afraid of Deshaun Jackson and Randall Cobb on my roster this evening. But, you know, let's not abuse the power, and you're better than 0-3 as well. You call yourself the fantasy god for a reason, but it's just not there, man. All right, so number 8, we have Josh Page. He had a very bold strategy this year. He has 3 tight ends and 3 quarterbacks on his roster. I don't think I've ever seen that in my life. I don't like this team, but fantasy's tricky. He does have Le'Veon Bell, though, and he has been a nice surprise for him. However, I feel like he's going to fall out of the playoff top 6 this year. And then we move on to number 7. Just out of the playoffs at this point in the season, it's me. I had many mistakes earlier this year. I drafted way too many running backs in a PPR league. My first one, didn't know how it worked. Doug Martin, Ben Tate had a lot of injuries. But, you know, I got my first win last week. So you gotta build from somewhere. When you're at the bottom, the only way is up. Moving on to number 6, Kyle Page. Kyle made a nice trade this week with me. He had a deep receiving core already. He had Julian Edelman. He's a PPR beast. He just added Randall Cobb and Deshaun Jackson. He's got a strong running back core of Andre Ellington, DeMarco Murray, and Jamal Charles. I see Kyle as a potential top 3 team this year. The fact that he's number 6 in the ranking, I'm kind of embarrassed for you, Kyle, but I think that the rest of the season is going to be strong for you. All right, number 5. In the top half of the rankings here, we start with Steven Smith. Your franchise player, Adrian Peterson, goes down. It's hard to recover when your number 1 pick goes down. That'll cripple any team in fantasy. But, good for you. Good thing for you, you're carrying 3 quarterbacks on your roster. Way too many, buddy. Surely there's some pieces you have that can be traded to build your team even better for the playoff run. That's all I got to say about your team, but we'll move on to Keith Page. Keith, sorry, buddy, I don't love your team, but they have been effective thus far. With Luck, Forte, and Jordy Nelson, they can score you enough points to get some victories, but I think you're going to pretty much end up in the middle of the pack of this league. Borderline playoff team. I think you may sneak into that 6th spot, but we'll see how it plays out the rest of the year. All right, and now to the top 3. We have Ryan Shaw, the first of the Shaw twins. I love this team. I like this team a lot. This week's a little rough for him. He's got a lot of buys, but there's a ton of talent in the squad. He features Matt Stafford and A.J. Green. They will carry him really far. I believe he's a playoff team, not a pretender at this point in the season. Moving on to the second Shaw twin, Kevin. Kevin's starting 3-0. He's doing really well for a guy who drafted a suspended kicker in the 2nd round of the draft. I guess it really paid off for you. But you know what? Having Peyton Manning as your quarterback does take you quite far, and you're doing good for now, but I think a few losses are going to be in your future. And you'll probably end up in that 3 through 5 seed, but I like your team thus far, and hopefully that suspended kicker can get you some points later this season. And then it brings us to our number 1 in the power rankings, Scott Page. He's really riding his beginner's luck. He's got Martellus Bennett and Calvin Johnson. He hasn't talked a lot of shit, but he is number 1 so far. He's undefeated, not looking back. Here's the funny thing about Scott Page, though. He's got that Andrew Luck flip phone. He can't really check his scores on Sunday. He had his wife download the ESPN app, and he looks over to Holly all the time and says, "Holly, how am I doing in fantasy? How am I doing in fantasy?" So she gets on that phone and checks for him. "Hey, Scott, you should invest in an iPhone. They're pretty much free these days." So good luck. Good luck to you, Scott, here in the future. I know that beginner's luck may run out at some point, but I think your roster's pretty strong, and ride it as long as you can, man. So there's your power rankings after 3 weeks in the fantasy football league. And remember, if you're winning, it's fantasy, and if you're losing, it's fake. We'll see you in week 5.